We started the company with a very simple inspiration. The internet was created for the English speakers, and it was time that somebody redesigned it for the world.
So, Avneesh, you have worked across large corporates, digital identity, and now AI. And I'm interested really in what experiences led you to start CAMB.AI and what problems were you most passionate about solving?
Well, thanks, Freddie, first of all, for having me on the podcast. And yes, I worked over the last 34 years. That's how long I've been in professional career, not to give away my age. But a common theme that has resonated across everything that I did. I've set up a number of businesses for larger corporations. And one of the themes that always existed in all the businesses was inclusivity, apart from the fact that we use digital technology and the power of digital technology to reach and to solve the problem of inclusivity. So, I work with the largest identity program, which was to give identity to over a billion people in India. Well, we realized that we were not just a billion people. I'm an Indian. We thought we were a billion people, but we realized that we were 1.4 billion people. And that, if anything, should tell you the magnanimity of the problem of identity or the lack of an acknowledged identity. 70% of the people in India did not have a form of acknowledged identity. And when you look at it a bit more fundamentally, you realize that if you don't have an acknowledged identity, you're not part of a formal system. You're not part of any benefits that the government would give out to you. You can't open a bank account. You can get a subsidy that the government might want to give to you. And in many societies around the world, lack of an acknowledged identity means lack of existence, actually. So that was one of the programs I played a role in, and very satisfying that we created the identity rails of the country on which today a lot of governance rides. I worked across financial inclusion, part of a program that gave a bank account digitally touchless to over 300 million people in the country.
Wow.
And not just in India, across a few other countries. I worked across digital media. We were trying to set up a post-production business for one of the largest Indian broadcasters called Z Network, digital connectivity, IoT. So there's a lot of inclusivity. But what brought me to CAMB.AI, which is the more pertinent question here, is my own personal experience growing up, right? When I grew up in India, you know why? Before I answer that question, do you know why I'm sitting here in front of you?
You tell me.
Just one thing that made the difference between me and some of the more smarter kids that I grew up with, and it was access to English language. I went to English language educations, a school that taught me in English language. I had access to English language awareness material, right? Magazines like India Today, which were published in English, and just that one little program, radio program that used to blare on my little radio at 10 o'clock in the night in India, and I would listen to it. It was a BBC program.
Really?
Right. And English made a substantial difference to what I did in life. But if you look at it, when you're on the right side of that, it seems very fair. But if you're not on the right side of it, it's extremely unfair. Language should not decide what you get to do in life, what impact you can bring to the society, and where you get to go. And that stayed on with me. Of course, there were experiential, learnings through, if you know a movie called A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Sure.
You do? Did you find it scary, by the way?
I actually can't remember if it's scary or not.
Well, go and watch it, and I'm sure it'll spook the hell out of you. But but you know what? I came out of the theater literally laughing my wits out, because it was dubbed in Hindi and there were Mickey Mousey voices. So every time the movie was supposed to be scary, me and my friends just fell out of the chair because it was so funny, right? So from very basic foundational problems of access to education, healthcare, to even entertainment, that's something I grew up. And more importantly, I co-founded CAMB.AI with my son, actually, 30 years apart. Everything has changed in 30 years. He can live his life on a smartphone. I did not have a smartphone when I was growing up and his age, right? But nothing fundamentally had changed in the world of language and the problems that language divide brings. And we decided to change the world. We started the company with a very simple inspiration. The internet was created for the English speakers. And it was time that somebody redesigned it for the world.
Yes, makes sense. So just to get some stats in there. So 1.4 billion people in India. How many of them have access, or how many of them actually to start with, can speak English? Do you know the stats around?
Be able to give you a very high, a very accurate stats. The urban population, the cities, even the tier two cities would have now an increasing population which has access and which can speak English, right? But then a 1.4 billion people is a lot of population. And that doesn't mean that somebody who doesn't speak English is not completely accomplished. They are educated people. The education levels, literacy levels are increasing, for sure, right? But to be able to be connected globally, I think English is still the most spoken language, right?
Yeah,
One of the most
absolutely.
spoken. There's a little stats that 80% plus of all digital content, video content, is in English language. And guess what? 17% or less people speak English around the world. So it's not a problem in India. It's a problem of global content creation and consumption, actually.
It's interesting. So India is a world superpower. It's also still emerging. Like it's got so much power still hidden behind it. How much do you think the how much benefit will there be to India from increasing the number of people who have access to speaking the English language? What could it unlock for the country in terms of?
I think it has changed over the years. When I was growing up, a lot depended on what kind of education you got, right? Of course, things have dramatically changed because in India, we have a fully autonomous education system now, right? There's autonomy in, pretty much everything that India does today. So, yes, there is a reliance on being globally connected, right? Not just to English speaking nations, but there's a lot of self reliance that India carries, right? But of course, in a global context, you have to be connected to that.
Absolutely. It almost feels like if you have some sort of software like CAMB.AI, you unlock massive GDP for every country that doesn't have English speaking first. I'm interested to hear what was firstly, can you explain what CAMB.AI does exactly? So we can have an understanding, people listening can understand exactly what it does and what problem it solves.
Great question, actually. So CAMB.AI is localization infrastructure. And very simply, what I mean by that is that we have a platform built on our own proprietary AI models in language translation and voice synthesis. And what that simply does is it can take any piece of content pretty much in any format. So whether it's a video, audio, text, document, music, any format that might come in future, print, and also interestingly conversations from one language into 150 languages plus, and we keep adding the languages. So if you have a piece of content, it doesn't matter whether you are a content company like an entertainment studio or a sports entity, or just an enterprise, right, which has content and needs to communicate, right? We are a content and communication infrastructure company. So we can take content in any language and turn that into 150 languages. So this podcast, we can live do it in 150 languages today.
So I need to speak to your head of marketing and your son and yourself. So to give people context for this, Mr. Beast, the biggest, most subscribed YouTuber in the world, he gets more views, I believe this is still true, on his Spanish and Mandarin channels than he does on his English. And his English channels get over 50 million views per video. That's the kind of thing we're talking about here, right? Where you can change the language of content to then create or get to access a larger market.
Yeah, well, certainly. I mean, that's one of the types of content you're talking about. Just rewind 1 year, just over a year back, right? Just imagine a game of soccer in certain part of the world, football for us. You're from England.
Yeah.
So football for us, a game of Major League Soccer is being played out, right, in Florida. And in comes the commentary in English language. And we translate that real time, zero touch, zero shot in over 4 languages. That was over a year back, right? Since then, we've been working with most of the major sporting entities. So on record, I think there were about 8 live events that used AI for real-time multilingual translation last year. All of them were done by CAMB.AI. And we actually worked on sports as the first use case just because academically speaking, experientially is the toughest type of content. So we solved that problem, and that helped us to create a platform which can do a bit simpler problem, like a recorded podcast, right? Because you have time to do post production. So we do live, we do VOD, we do documents, we do text, we do conversations. One of the things that we are super proud of is that today on a digital channel, you and I can talk in our own language, and CAMB.AI will do the magic in between.
So I listened to a podcast on this week with Alex Hormozy, who's one of the biggest guys in the world for business mentorship. And he was speaking along the same lines as Gary Vaynerchuk, where he's saying the future of content is live content. The most fans come towards those who stream and those who go live with their content. And Mr. Beast had told him some advice, which was everything you do, whether it's an ad, a VSL, a podcast, a YouTube video, also do it live. So if you're going live in the corner of the room, which we might be doing right now, CAMB could then change that live into 150 languages. Is that what we're talking about?
100%.
So you're able to access a massive audience, and this is already working for Major League Soccer in the US.
Well, it's working for Major League Soccer, and not only that, any major three-letter league, or we regularly stream, for example, for Eurovision sports, and we've done a number of world championships. I mean, I think about a few weeks back we did the World Boxing Championship. So,
okay.
So I think it doesn't matter what the kind of content is, we're able to translate that, and of course it's delivering a different level of fan engagement, fan experience, right? And that, of course, has ultimately commercial impact for the customers that we work for. But I think if you fundamentally look at it, there's a very clear divide between the world of sports, entertainment, and the rest of the genre, right? We know that entertainment always used localization or dubbing, or subtitling for the longest period of time, for the decades, right? Because that industry was built on it, and it's prepared. It has distribution channels across the world to distribute channel. Not enough, we believe, but that's an industry which is kind of which is struggling with respect to the high cost and the slow speed of localization. But look at the world of sports; it never had a real credible and a scalable solution to do a real time game, right? So what this has done is really unlock the ability for organizations to lower the cost, improve efficiencies, and actually reach out to the world at large. And especially what I feel is that in the world of sports, how does sports evolve? If you look at it, how has any game evolved? I believe it evolves when there's diversity, injected into the sports. One of the ways to inject diversity is to take it to diverse populations. But when you take that, you got to take it in their language, right? So for the sports to evolve in general, apart from all commercial gains, you got to take it across borders, really.
Totally. So you mentioned earlier that your son is your co-founder. He's 30 years younger than you. I happen to know as well that he was working at Apple on their AI, and he's incredible, along with your team, at looking at AI in a different way and engineering it in a way that we can't even imagine, I'm sure. So when someone's listening to this and thinking, okay, well, what is the difference between CAMB.AI and something like Google Translate or the modern AI platforms that we've got? How would you answer that to them?
I think let me try to explain that with an example. Maybe that's...
Please, yeah, of course.
Again, imagine a NASCAR race. What do you expect in a NASCAR race?
200 laps of cars going in circles.
Hundreds of laps of cars going around. But what's operating in that environment is unimaginable variance in the content, right? The whole language is highly nuanced, right? There's variability of audio, speech, noise levels, right? And the speed in a NASCAR race or any auto sports is incredible, right? You can imagine in any other type of content, even in this podcast, at some point I might just stop talking, right? But in an auto race, the commentator never stops, right? So that's the complexity. When you look at it, it requires multiple things to happen. It's not just translation. It's actually adaptation of the original content into a new language, preserving the meaning and the very context of what's being said, right? Sometimes adapting it to a new culture, right? It's also about preserving the emotions, the prosody. It's also about packaging it. You can't call a goal after the goal has been scored, right? You can't. You just can't call a lap after the lap is done or before the lap is done. So the whole packaging, we do play by play performance transfer from the original to the target language as if it's always made for the target
So,
language.
so the bit that I'm really blown away by is how you're saying that it keeps the emotion. Because as we speak now, people listening, without seeing us, know who's talking out of us too. We're speaking in different tones, we have different accents, we have different pace and cadence. So how, and you promise to keep that, right? And keep the nuances, keep the emotion. How is that working in the back end? How can you promise that in live time? Because people, they need that emotion. They need to understand who's speaking and why and their nuances. It's such a massive part of
Freddie,
it.
our technology is zero shot.
Okay.
What that really means is that we learn from the content that's coming in.
Okay.
So we don't use pre-trained voices, pre-trained, context. We really look at what's going on, and we use that to actually give out the content, which allows us to do many things. And it has allowed us to solve problems which have stayed unsolved forever, right? I mean, I'll tell you what, sometimes people equate localization to either text translation or to something called text to speech. It's neither of the two.
11 Labs, I'm thinking of.
Yeah, it's not even the two put together, by the way. It's actually many other things that go, right? So, I mean, you took the name, but yeah, that's a great company to do text to speech, but it's one thing to do text to speech, another thing to carry word by word emotions, right? And that happens when you have a multimodal cognition of what the content is, right? When you take the context from it and not use anything which is pre-made, pre-trained. That's what we do, and that's why multi-speaker diarization. I mean, if everybody in Jitech started speaking, one after the other, we'll be able to discern who's speaking, who's not.
I just love that it solved that problem that you had in the cinema when you came out and you've been laughing at a spooky film, but also that it opens up and breaks down inequality barriers for so many people to live a much more fulfilling and open life. I think there's so much power in that. I'm interested to hear from you what some of the early challenges were when you were building this company, because it seems like there's so much that needed to be built from scratch.
I think one of the things that we were very conscious about is the fact that we wanted to create something which will solve the problem holistically, right? And for us, solving it holistically meant that we wanted to create a localization infrastructure. Now, you can always, obviously ask us, 2 years 2-year-old company, what business do you have to call yourselves an infrastructure of any kind, right? Google is an infrastructure, right? The first example that you gave me is how do you differentiate between Google Translate and yourselves, right? AWS is an infrastructure. What business do you have in infrastructure? So we wanted to create a localization infrastructure which would do everything end to end, deliver something which is meaningful. Just imagine we worked with you and translated this podcast into 150 languages. There's nothing like a half localization. Would you take a half localized podcast? You throw it away, right? So we're not solving any problems. So we wanted to solve the complete problem for all kinds of content. And that was a tough problem to solve. But rather than trying to create 100 solutions and bundling it together and calling ourselves the infrastructure of the world, we solved the toughest problem and then we generalized it to all kinds of content. So, just keeping ourselves honest to that path and not falling, to the temptation of just only pivoting ourselves to a text to speech company or translation company. Of course, that required focus. But I think that was one of the things that we were intent to do. And that was one of the things that I don't know whether it was a challenge or not, but that was the focus that was required to build the company. Because we continue to build the company. I'm not saying that to reach a digital AI technology company will never reach the end.
Of course.
So, we'll keep building, but that's where we are headed.
Yeah. So when you're sat down with the co-founder, with the team, and you're looking at the map for the next 5 years, what does the world look like if CAMB.AI gets to the place that you would like it to be in 5 years' time?
I think the world will look very different. 5 years is much too long a time. I think the world will look very different the next 6 months, 1 year. Nobody believed in AI before ChatGPT came out, right? And I still look back and I see a look of disbelief, and I would tell people that, well, we'll convert a movie into a different language and say, oh, come on, it just cannot happen, right? So the world has come along a long way, but what we fundamentally believe is in our line of space, right? We believe that in the world of heightened consumerism, heightened automation, voice will become the interface of everything which is consumer. Your consumer devices, your home, your car, your television screen, anything will have voice as the interface. That's the fundamental technology that we're working on, right? The world of AI has actually grown in a manner that it is very token based. I'm sure you use ChatGPT. The more you use it, the more you pay, right? Great model, but is that scalable? Probably not, right? I mean, incidentally, we recently launched our models, our speech model on Google Vertex AI and AWS Bedrock. These are two of the largest model gardens, AI model gardens in the world. And on both of them, we've launched a fixed price model, which takes away the whole token based pricing because you have to enable people to use AI in a manner which is scalable and where large scale use cases can spawn out, right? I mean, how many real use cases do you really see in today's, even after all the advancement that has happened in AI, right? Is it only, a line of code that you can code, or is it only a memo that you want to summarize? You want to create use cases which will change the P&Ls of organizations, change societies. So for that, AI has to become scalable. And we fundamentally believe that token-based pricing is a flawed model. We already addressed that and we continue to address that. The second thing that's going to happen is that the whole consideration of privacy, right, autonomy, edge will increase dramatically, right? That's the other thing we're addressing right now. We're bringing our technology closer to the edge, right? Why should it sit in the cloud, even if it's not token based, right? And the moment you do that, it'll become the proliferation of the technology will be much larger and can go down to 8 billion people. That's our vision for CAMB.AI. That's our vision for the world. We want to solve the problem of localization, not for a few enterprises, but for 8 billion people in the world.
Yeah.
And that can only happen when I hand over the technology in your palm on somebody's device.
Yeah.
And they can really localize on the fly.
I'm sure there'll be a lot of people listening to this who can think of applications for the software straight away. I'm interested, before we wrap up, if someone's listening to this and they've got a software idea or they're building a software business and they're looking for investment, what would be your advice to them when they're in those first startup areas? They're looking for investment. They're not quite sure how to understand if their business is scalable. What would be your advice to someone who's in those early stages?
Creating a startup, first of all, is a work of very deep passion, really. Is a work of deep passion, deep analysis, and just deep commitment, actually, right? It's okay not to be very clear about things because, when you're building out, I would just say that you got to pick up a problem that is worthy to be solved. And most smart people, most founders find that really. And you got to be committed to it and passionate about it, right? And not be concerned if not everything makes sense on day one, really. I mean, things unravel and doors open. Investors look for things which are impactful, which solve a real problem, which are scalable. Pay attention to whether, most founders have a great idea. They do solve a problem. I think the next biggest thing to look at is, will it scale? Will it go to every possible person, enterprise, everybody that you wanted to go to in a manner which is easy enough and scalable enough? Otherwise, how do you take the solution to the world? So, that's the little advice. I don't know.
I think it's great advice. Take action over an idea and then make sure you can actually grow it and solve problems.
Yeah.
Avneesh, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Freddie. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.